welcome to BizTech on GhanaWeb TV. My name is Ernestina Sewa Asante. Today we are going to talk about Africa's ballooning debt, which has hit over $2.14 trillion. And today my guest is a professor of finance, Professor Godfred Bokpin, for us to delve deeper into this topic. Later, we are going to look into the black paper that they have brought to bear. Prof, you're welcome on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah.
Okay, first off, how can these historical injustices be sorted out in the midst of addressing our economic challenges?
Well, the starting point is to understand, have the right diagnosis of where we have come from. Largely what we are confronted with today in terms of the economic structure, debt crisis and all of that. You can trace that also to legacies related to colonization, because even though from the 60s, Africa broadly gained independence, the economic structure they left for us is essentially what we are practicing. So we can't expect what they designed and left for us simply to serve us because we are in charge now and all of that. So if you look at the economic structure, then again, even though we are making the case that yes, colonization probably is over, they are no longer here, but they are present through the structures that they have put in place that we are still practicing. And especially if you look at the new form of colonization, essentially through debt and trade diplomacy, we say in finance that the word bondage and bonds, as in issuing bonds, they are from the same family word. Okay, and the Bible is very clear. The Bible says that just as a servant is a slave to the master, so is a borrower a servant to the lender. You should understand all those relationships, especially within the global financial system that has been designed essentially to favor the powers that be. Okay, so within that context, we are truly servants to those who lend to us. And the form of the slavery that it takes has more to do with the higher interest payment that we have to pay for utilizing the same capital. The average weighted interest cost for Germany over the years, as was done by the UN, was just 1.3%, US 3.1%, but Africa is borrowing averagely at 11.6%. So these are dollar denominated. So once you borrow at that expensive rate, or the cost is that high, if you are not investing them in the productive sectors of the economy, and especially the way Africa has utilized debt in terms of funding consumption, then there's no way you'll be able to create enough assets in your economy to be able to absorb those debts. So you just run into debt crisis. So there's one thing asking for debt cancellation. We've gone through that. I mean, in the early 2000s, HIPIC, Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative, they just took a pen, canceled our debt. Ghana, we saved in excess of $4 billion. But a couple of decades down the line, we are back here. So it means that in solving this, we should be looking at more of structural issues from the global, regional, and then national level, rather than just asking for debt forgiveness and all of that. And I think we are framing all of this within the Stop the Bleeding paper, within the reparative narrative. That yes, more than just saying forgiveness and all of that, we should be looking at broader reform that makes Africa a bit able to compete at the global level, even in terms of access to credit. We're also making the point that if you look at what leaves the continent in terms of what Africa loses annually, relative to what we get by way of borrowing, foreign direct investment, portfolio flows, and even aid and all of that, it is so small compared to what leaves the continent through illicit financial flows. And that is why, if you look at the composition of the team that worked on the Stop the Bleeding paper, we have experts in illicit financial flows. Dr. Senanu is here. We have experts in the area of climate change. That's how come Eunice is on the team. And then when it comes to natural resource governance, we also have Gabriel on the team. So we've looked at it from different angles. So, and our conclusion, like others have said, is that Africa probably is the only continent where water flows upwards. And it's for a good reason. The reason is that if you look at illicit financial flows, we are losing billions of dollars. And if you compare that to what we get by borrowing, aid, and the rest of them, we will be better off if we'll be able to strengthen our internal governance framework to make sure that we don't lose as much as we are losing through illicit financial flows, we'll be better off. If you do the comparison, you look at FDI flows, portfolio flows, loans that we take annually, aid, and the rest of them, actually, Africa is a net creditor to the rest of the world. Africa exists essentially for the rest of the world. Unfortunately, Africa does not exist for Africa. And if you look at the way Africa was designed, in terms of the partitioning of Africa, some people say it's artificial and all of that. There is very little fiscal connectivity within Africa itself, because Africa was designed to serve the rest of the world. So our airspace, our land ports and all of that only connect Africa to the rest of the world. So if you have to do business within Africa, it's more expensive. For instance, if you say you want to ship goods to some African countries today, it first has to go to Europe for it to be redirected here. And in fact, then it's easier to jump into the air and catch a flight and exit Africa to the rest of the world than Africa to Africa. Can you imagine, between Ghana and Benin, by air should take you less than 45 minutes, but it may take you a whole day if you leave Accra to get to Benin, because you have to do trotro in the air. You have to go to Lomé and go and wait for a couple of hours before you take another flight to Benin. Meanwhile, Accra, Benin direct should take you less than 45 minutes.
So in your view, do you think Africa is yet to discover its true value?
We don't know who we are. And that is why this conversation is very important. You simply just can't take over a system that some people spend centuries to design, to serve them. You simply just can't take it over and expect that it will suddenly serve your interests. We need a whole reconstruction, re-engineering, restructuring of our economy and the system that we have, and invest significantly in infrastructure. Unfortunately, at the African political leadership level, the conversation is not that strong. And even if it is, we don't have that will to back that, because the global political economy is very strong. We are here to navigate our way through. And then again, if you see internal conflicts within Africa, you can trace a bigger portion of that to colonial legacies. Because, so even though these colonial masters have left, they are still with us. Then we have the new entrants, which is also creating different dynamics within the geopolitics. The new entrants are the likes of China, India, Russia, and the rest of them, who equally wants a part of this lady called Africa, and yet the African old boyfriend doesn't want to also leave. So the competition is keener. It's just Africa that is yet to discover who they are.
So what alternative module do you think we can use in a bid to become self-reliant?
I think that we need to internalize this engagement and awareness. That is very, very important. And that would also help us to deal with our own artificial kind of conflict that we get ourselves embroiled in, so that we'll be able to negotiate from position of strength if we're working as one. If you talk about US, it's several states together. So what is backing them is huge. Africa needs to unite, much more than when Nkrumah spoke about it so many decades ago. And then we'll be able to negotiate from position of strength. Then, more importantly, we have natural resources, but we are not benefiting from the natural resources the way we should, because of the weak natural resource governance and the weak fiscal regime that we have in them. What is ours, we must be able to utilize it, because that is our first mover advantage. And we have essentially allowed exploitation and so many. But more importantly, Africa was designed to produce raw materials. 60 years down the line after independence, we are still producing what? Raw materials. What we need is bold declaration and empower indigenous African entrepreneurs to be able to add value to our raw materials. I'll give you an example. If you export gold, the maximum profit you will get is between 1% and 5% if you export raw gold. Meanwhile, if you process gold, the minimum profit you will get is 10%. Okay, so you can see this year our government is telling us that they have exported gold worth $5 billion and all of that. And yet the cedi is nowhere to be found, right? And all of that. But the reason is that $5 billion is not spendable money. Okay, because that is not profit, it's not impacting your revenue envelope until you are adding value, and adding value, you'll be creating decent jobs, right? And when you create decent jobs, they will be paid, they will pay taxes, consumption will also pick up and all of that. So we need to look at the entire value chain and manage that very well, because that's the only way growth can come from Europe, North America, when they started their industrialization, everything, it was about creating decent jobs. We are not doing that. Pick Ghana. You know the interesting thing? The World Bank is telling us that between 2012 and 2023, Ghana has only created on net basis 250,000 jobs. Can you imagine within this period? Guess what? Do you know the people who have entered the labor market looking for jobs? 2.7 million people within that same space have entered the labor market, competing for 250,000 jobs. Even if you majored in job creation in the university, you'll be unemployed.
That's
that
true.
will be your portion.
Okay, so talking about FDIs, government says that they are going to increase the minimum capital requirements.
They said they will remove it.
They are going to take it off. How is that going to affect local businesses? First of all, what is your take on that position?
You know, I've made my view known already that I don't subscribe to that. Of course, I'm willing to give government the benefit of the doubt because I haven't seen the new bill, the GIPC bill, and all of that. So I don't know what mitigation measures they have in there. But baseline, if you tell me you are going to eliminate the minimum capital requirement, what you are saying is that the retail level, okay, is open to competition. And there's no way Ghanaians can compete because we are not saving. Okay, so what it means is that foreign capital will be treasured because they can just come in, enter the retail market, and compete our SMEs away. Certainly, there cannot be a future in that area. But remember, there are people who are lobbying to enter the retail market. There are people who are lobbying to enter our market. So we need to understand the dynamics and all of that. But I don't think that is the way to go. Proper FDI, they know what they want. And when they are coming, they come with huge capital. That is what we should be focusing at. And how do we, and the next important thing, how do we package our SMEs through joint ventures and partnerships with this foreign capital so that we also benefit from advanced technologies and the rest of them. But the solution is not to allow influx into the retail market and compete Ghanaians away. Even now with the minimum capital, Ghanaians are visibly absent because they are not saving. Ghanaians are not saving. Salary levels are very low.
Exactly.
And so you check your saving balance. I'm not saying you should tell me, but you check. You don't have much in there, okay? So, and it's very common all over the place. Look, any country that does not empower the citizens to save, that country is not accumulating capital. That country cannot finance its own development. And that is why every day, so our president will go to China, Japan, and go and tell them, bring capital. Because we are not building capital here. So the limited economic opportunities we have, we can't take advantage of that. You tell me, which aspect of this Ghanaian economy are Ghanaians in charge? Maybe the corruption industry, yes, but real sector, we are absent. Banking, there's nothing Ghana about the Ghanaian banking industry. Check the top 10. How many of them are local banks and the rest of them? Right now, the Nigerians are taking over the financial space, right? They are the big regional banks, the Access Bank, the UBA, and the Zen. Tell me one indigenous Ghanaian bank that has gone beyond even Accra. I hope you understand that. Yeah. So we should be intentional about growing some of our indigenous businesses, not only to be local champions at the regional level and then at the global level. That is the only way we can make it. Look, let me tell you, by 2075, Nigeria will be in the top 5 big economies in the world. 2075. I'm sure you'll be alive by then. Yes. You will see it. Okay, where would Ghana be? And the rest of them. I'm not saying that we should be competing with Nigeria, but we can tag along. And the rest of them, when we also empower our businesses to do well. Look at Singapore, a small country, not long ago from independence, we're better than Singapore and Malaysia, but look at where they are today. And so we are saying that the way to develop, we know, we need to have the will, and we must be willing. We can only develop when politicians are willing to let others win.
Okay. Should Ghana enter the capital market?
Well, it has to be done phased out. I believe that without the capital market welcoming us, we are going to struggle. we are going to struggle with our debt management, because if you look at the bullet payment in 2027, 2028, without the capital market for refinancing, or what we call rollover, there is no way we'll be able to meet those obligations and also set aside sizable resources for development spending. So we need to enter the market. But I agree with government that we need to look at the domestic market first. I think they're looking at end of this year. Yeah. They want to enter the domestic market, and then we begin to lengthen the maturity profile. And maybe, hopefully, as the IMF, our headmaster, has instructed us, 2027, then we can also enter the international capital market. Okay. We are working with their timetable, not ours.
So lastly, let's talk about the black paper, just a highlight, your highlight of the whole research that you conducted.
Yeah, the highlight is that there is a strong link between the current debt crisis, economic crisis, to colonial legacies that we need to understand and then restructure. Otherwise, what will happen 10 years from now will not be different from what is happening right now, because the structure needs to be re-engineered. Then again, we looked at the black paper from economic point of view, and then we also look at natural resources. We also look at illicit financial flows. We looked at climate change. Then we looked at inequality, and then women empowerment within that space. And if you look at along all these channels, you can see colonial legacies. What it also means is that after we have taken over, we have not been conscious and deliberate about re-engineering our economic structure and all of that, and we are just playing along the rule books, and that is what has brought us here. We are happy with the black paper because we believe that there is a way out. It's not just diagnosis of what the issues are. There is a way out.
There is a black paper. I'm sure you are wondering why it is termed black. But then we have the experts here to give us more details about this research that they have conducted. So why the black paper?
So it's being called a black paper as opposed to the typical white paper, because as we've said, we are exerting ourselves as Africans. And so why call it a black paper when we are trying to, come out as Africans and own our continent and try to assert ourselves. Okay. So it's called the black paper.
Right. So what is the content?
So the content of the paper is under a broad campaign that is called Stop the Bleeding. And as you can tell from the name, we're talking about how funds leave the continent. Funds that we so desperately need leave the continent through various means. Illegal means, through the illicit financial flows, and also Africa as the net creditor to the rest of the world. And so that paper is talking about things that we need to consider. What are the things that are in our economic structure that is causing these, this bleeding, right? And then some proposed solutions on issues and places that we need to look at as a continent, at the global level and then at the national level, to stop the bleeding, as it were.
Okay. So, Doc, illicit financial flow. We've been talking about this since under invoicing, transfer, price transfer, amongst others. What are the loopholes once again, and how can we seal it for the monies that we are looking for remain on the continent?
I think since we are discussing reparations, we discuss it within the context of that. So just like we said a few minutes ago in the earlier interview, there are structural issues that have caused our systems to be very porous and weak, which is leading to these illicit financial flows, leakages, as some researchers decide to call it. So once the global financial architecture is structured in a way that doesn't favor Africa, secondly, once the colonial era has created some economic and social political structures that influence corruption and other things, our systems that we put in place are not strong enough to check against corruption, embezzlement, bribery, and all these things to stop the leakages from flowing through our system. So these are some of the things that our paper seeks to highlight. And once we are able to check these things, we need to have a conversation, which this one is very important. This conference tries to highlight what works for Africa. what political systems work for Africa. Once we have that conversation, because what was put in place by the colonial masters is not fit for purpose in this current dispensation. So we need to have that conversation, come up with what works, the best system, political and cultural systems that work for Africa, and then we figure out how this system that is fit for purpose in this particular dispensation for Africa is best at sealing or blocking the leakages. That is the only way we can stop some of these illicit financial flows. Africa loses currently about $80 billion annually to illicit financial flows, which, if sealed, this is money that can take care of education, healthcare spending, and help Africa's effort to meet global goals of 2030.
Okay, so let me move straight to the gentleman here. What are some of the recommendations that your paper highlighted?
Right, so first of all, for Africa to stop the bleeding, we have to take charge of the narrative.
Okay.
That's the first thing we need to do. Secondly, we also have to have or hold on to our bargaining chip. At the moment, when we go to the table of negotiation, we allow the colonialists or the people that are causing the bleeding to basically dictate to us what to do. We have to go with a strong arm. And the strong arm would come from not the political elite, but from the common people. Because you see, in Africa, the politicians have their own interest, and the people have their own interest. What we want is for the people's interest to be upheld. Now, for that to happen, we need to have a scenario where, as part of the advocacy, right, we bring the people along. If you make the people make the demands, the politicians want to stay in power. So if you tie these interests to the politicians' interest to stay in power, what would happen is that you get the job done, right? So for us to get the job done, we have to, as part of our advocacy, try to influence the electorate, right? I mean, if we want to stop illicit flow of capital, do the people understand what is happening? If they want it and they make it an electoral issue, then we can get the politicians to do something about it. So these are some of the things that our paper tries to highlight, which we propose workable and implementable steps that the continent can follow in order to achieve to stop the bleeding. Thank you.
So educate our viewers about climate financing.
Okay, thank you very much. So when we are talking about climate finance, we have to link it to the broad framework of what we are talking about here, because I think Dr. Nkommo here mentioned about how the global financial architecture is designed not to favor Africa. And the climate finance structure is not different. So what happens there is the same thing that happens there. In climate finance basically are the funds that are dispersed or meant to help deal with the climate change, the effects of climate change. So meant to support adaptation and mitigation. And when we talk about adaptation, we are talking about how to cope with the effects of climate change. And the mitigation has to deal more with preventing the climate crisis. So that has to do more with reducing carbon emissions and investing more in renewable energy and those type of things. So that's what climate finance does, brings funds to help cater for adaptation and then mitigation. So what we are talking about here in this paper with regards to climate finance is that mainly two issues. Most of the climate finance that flows into Africa comes in the form of loans. And you know, in this conference we are talking about debt. And many African countries are already crippled by severe debts at high interest rates. So once the finance, which is most needed by Africa, because interestingly, Africa is the least contributor to carbon emissions, less than 4%, but we suffer the burden. So we suffer disproportionately the effects of the climate crisis. So we need most those funds to deal with the effects of climate change. But at the same time, when the funds are coming in, they are coming in as debt. Again, when these funds are coming in, they are coming from externally, of course, the global north. And as my friends have referenced here, the colonizers, and they design these mechanisms. And sometimes, and most of the time, they don't match their domestic priorities or what the country, these African countries need in terms of climate. So the challenge is twofold. If we are going to benefit from climate finance, then we have to assert ourselves on the global stage. How do we do that? By presenting a strong front. And a way to do that is to unite as Africans. I think we, as a region, we have a significantly large number of countries. And if all the African countries are united in pushing for an agenda, I think there is some success that can come out of that. And then in the second place, we have to deal with our own leakages internally at the domestic level and at the national level. If the money is coming in and is going to flow out, then what's the point of going in there to get the money? And then also the African agency, how do we do things to help ourselves? If our continent is already designed to work against us, then we need to work. We can't continue to depend on the money that will come from there while we are working for them to pay for what they have done. At the same time, we also have to exert ourselves because all our hope cannot be on getting people to pay for things that they've done.
All right, so due to time, what's your final word?
Well, so my final word would be that the Stop the Bleeding campaign is not a campaign for a few. It's a campaign for all Africans. So all Africans and all those who wish Africa well should come on board and support the campaign. Thank you.
Thank you too, Doc.
Africa can do this. We just need to come together. We have the strength, we have the natural resources, we have the human resources to pull this off. We just have to present a united front and attack this issue of reparation and reparative justice with a lot of strength. And I'm sure once we show strength at a global stage, the world will be ready to listen to us.
Okay, so this has been another edition of BizTech on GhanaWeb TV. Earlier, we spoke to Professor Godfred Boppin, and I have these beautiful minds that have spoken about the Black Paper and Africa's Balloon Debt. My name is Ernestina Sewa Asante.